Emma did not want to go to the sleepover, but she forced herself to go because she was tired of feeling alone. It was the first weekend of summer, and her friend, Claire, had begged her to come over, saying it would be just the two of them with movies and snacks and laughter. But the moment Emma stepped into Claire's old house, she felt the air change. The house smelled like old wood and dust. The walls were covered in faded photos of people who were not smiling enough, and there was a heaviness in the air that pressed on her chest. Claire was excited and pulled Emma to her room upstairs, where the windows rattled from the soft wind outside. They set up blankets and pillows on the floor and turned on a movie, but Emma could not focus. She felt like someone was watching them from the hallway. Claire laughed and talked about school and boys and summer plans, but Emma kept looking at the door, where the darkness of the hallway seemed to be getting deeper as the night grew longer. They ate chips and drank soda and tried to laugh, but there was something wrong with the house. The way the wood creaked, the way the shadows moved, the way the air felt colder near the door. Claire noticed Emma looking at the door and laughed, saying her house was old and weird. But Emma did not laugh back. She felt like there was someone standing just outside the door, waiting for the lights to go off. Claire turned off the lights, and they lay in the blankets whispering about secrets and small dreams. But Emma could not sleep. She kept looking at the door, waiting for something to move. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the fear, but the fear sat heavy on her chest like a weight that would not leave. She heard a sound, a soft creak on the floor outside the room. Her eyes opened wide in the darkness. Claire was asleep next to her, breathing softly. The sound came again, a slow, careful step on the old wood. Emma held her breath, her heart beating so loud she thought the sound would wake Claire. The door moved just a little, the darkness of the hallway spilling into the room. Emma could see nothing, but she could feel it, the cold air moving across her face, the weight of eyes looking at her. She could not move. She could not breathe. She felt frozen, as if the darkness had taken away all her strength. The door opened more, and Emma saw a shape, a tall, thin shadow standing in the doorway. The shape did not move, but Emma felt it looking at her. She wanted to scream, but her voice was trapped inside her. The shadow took one slow step into the room, and Emma felt the air get colder. She could see the outline of a face, pale and empty, the eyes dark holes, the mouth a thin line. The shadow moved closer, one slow step after another. Emma tried to wake Claire, but her hand would not move. She felt tears in her eyes as the shadow moved closer, the cold touching her skin. The shadow stopped next to her, looking down at her, the eyes empty, the face pale. The shadow bent down slowly, the cold getting stronger and stronger, and Emma closed her eyes, waiting for the darkness to take her. She heard a voice, soft and cold, saying her name. Emma, Emma, Emma. She opened her eyes and saw the shadow was gone. The door was closed. The hallway was quiet. Claire was still sleeping next to her. The air was warm again, but Emma could not shake the feeling that the shadow was still there, hiding in the darkness of the room, waiting for her to close her eyes again. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the blankets, watching the door, the shadows moving with the wind outside, the fear sitting with her. As the hours passed and the sky turned from dark to gray, she knew the shadow would come again. She knew the sleepover was not just a sleepover. It was something else, something waiting in the dark, something that had found her and would not leave her alone. She knew that the real horror was not in the stories they told each other at night, but in the silence of the dark, in the cold air that moved when no one was there, and the feeling of eyes watching from the shadows. She knew that the night was just the beginning, and she would never be the same again. Emma did not tell Claire about the shadow she saw because she thought maybe it was just her fear playing games. But when the next night came and Claire asked her to stay again, Emma felt the same heavy feeling in her chest, the fear that sat quietly until the lights went out. Claire was laughing and telling stories as they made popcorn in the small kitchen, but Emma kept looking at the hallway. The shadows there felt alive, like they were breathing and moving when no one was looking. The second night was colder. The air felt like ice on her skin as they carried the bowls of popcorn back to the room. Claire was happy, but Emma felt something was wrong again. The old house creaked with every step and the air smelled like wet soil and old wood. They started another movie, but Emma could not hear it. She was watching the doorway where the darkness seemed to be waiting. She felt her skin crawl as she saw the shadow again. Just for a moment, standing in the hallway before it slipped away. Claire did not see it. She was too busy laughing at the movie, but Emma could not laugh. The fear was sitting in her throat, heavy and cold. When the movie ended, Claire turned off the lights and they lay down again in the blankets. The darkness wrapped around them like a thick fog. Emma tried to keep her eyes open, but they closed for a moment, and when she opened them, she saw the shadow standing at the foot of the bed. It was closer this time, taller than before, its pale face looking at her with empty dark holes where eyes should have been. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone. She tried to move, but her body would not listen. The shadow lifted a hand, slowly reaching towards her, and Emma felt the cold air get colder, as if the darkness was pulling the warmth from the room. She could hear her heart in her ears, loud and fast. As the shadow came closer, she wanted to wake Claire, but she could not move. The shadow bent down closer to her face, and Emma saw that its mouth was open, but no sound came out, only the cold air and the darkness. Emma closed her eyes tight and felt tears on her face, the cold air touching her skin, the fear making her shake inside. She opened her eyes again, and the shadow was gone. The room was empty, but the cold was still there. Claire was sleeping next to her, peaceful and quiet, but Emma knew that the shadow was still there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for her. She sat up slowly, looking around the room, the fear still heavy in her chest. She saw the door was open, just a little, and the hallway was dark. She stood up and walked slowly towards the door, her feet cold on the wooden floor. The darkness in the hallway felt thick as she stepped into it. The air was colder in the hallway, and she could hear the soft creaks of the old wood under her feet. She looked down the hallway and saw the shadow standing at the end, waiting for her, its pale face watching her, its dark eyes empty and cold. Emma took a step back, but the shadow took a step forward, and Emma felt the fear rise inside her. She turned to run back to the room, but the door closed on its own, and she was alone in the hallway with the shadow. The darkness around her felt alive, like it was breathing. She could hear a soft whispering sound, like someone calling her name. Emma, Emma, Emma. She closed her eyes and covered her ears, but the whispering got louder. She opened her eyes and saw the shadow standing right in front of her, its face close to hers, the cold air making her skin hurt. She tried to scream, but her voice was lost. The shadow lifted its hand and touched her face, and she felt the cold move through her skin into her bones. The darkness filled her eyes, and she fell to the floor. The last thing she saw was the shadow standing over her. Before everything went black, Emma woke up on the cold floor, her body shaking as she pulled herself up. The hallway was empty, but the air still felt heavy, like something was pressing down on her chest. She tried to open the door to Claire's room, but it would not move. She pushed harder, but it felt like something was holding it shut. She could hear Claire breathing inside, sleeping, without knowing that Emma was outside with the darkness. Emma turned around and looked down the hallway. The darkness was thick, but she could see the shape of the shadow standing at the end, watching her, its pale face glowing in the dark, its empty eyes locked on her. Emma felt tears on her face as she took a step back, but the shadow started moving towards her slowly. With each step, the cold air got colder, and the fear inside her grew. She turned and ran down the hallway, her feet slipping on the old wooden floor, the darkness behind her moving like a wave. She reached the stairs and ran down them, the shadows on the walls moving as if they were alive, reaching for her. She ran into the living room and stopped. The air was cold, and she could see her breath in front of her. The lights were off, but the moonlight through the window showed the shape of the shadow standing in the corner of the room, watching her. Emma tried to scream, but her voice was still gone. The shadow started moving towards her again, slow and silent. Emma turned and ran to the kitchen, the old tiles cold under her feet. She grabbed a small knife from the counter, her hands shaking as she turned to face the shadow. The shadow stopped in the doorway, its empty eyes looking at her, the cold air moving into the kitchen as it stepped closer. Emma held the knife up, but the shadow did not stop it, moved closer and closer. Until it was right in front of her, the cold making her body ache. She swung the knife, but it went through the shadow like it was smoke. The shadow lifted its hand and touched her face, and Emma felt the cold move into her eyes, the darkness filling her vision. She fell to the floor as the shadow stood over her. She closed her eyes and waited for the darkness to take her. But then she heard a voice. Claire was calling her name. Emma, Emma, Emma opened her eyes and saw Claire standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear as she looked at the shadow. The shadow turned to look at Claire, and the cold in the room grew stronger. Claire stepped back, but she did not run. She grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her up. The shadow moved towards them, but Claire held Emma close and whispered that they had to go. Now Emma felt her body move as Claire pulled her through the kitchen to the back door, the shadow following them, the cold air wrapping around them as they ran. Claire opened the door, and they ran into the dark yard, the grass wet and cold under their feet. The shadow stepped out of the house and into the yard, the darkness around it moving like smoke. Emma and Claire ran towards the old shed at the back of the yard, the shadow following them. Without a sound they reached the shed, and Claire opened the door, pushing Emma inside before closing the door behind them. The inside of the shed was dark and smelled like old wood and rust. They could hear the soft sound of the wind outside, but the cold was still there. The shadow was outside the shed waiting. Emma and Claire held each other, their bodies shaking with fear. Claire whispered that the shadow had been in the house for a long time, that it came to her at night, that it watched her from the shadows, and that she was sorry for bringing Emma there. Emma felt the fear and anger inside her, but she held Claire close and told her that they would find a way to stop it, that they would not let the darkness take them. They could hear the soft sound of the shed door moving, the cold air coming through the cracks as the shadow tried to get in. They closed their eyes and held each other, waiting for the dawn to come. Emma and Claire sat in the dark shed as the cold air came through the cracks in the wood. The darkness outside felt like it was alive, pressing against the thin walls as they held each other close. Emma could hear the soft sound of whispering outside, her name being called again and again. Emma, Emma. Claire was shaking as she whispered that she could see the shadow through the cracks, that it was standing there watching them, waiting for them to open the door. Emma felt the fear deep inside her like ice in her blood, but she held Claire's hand tight and told her that they would not let it win. They would not let the darkness take them. Claire told Emma that the shadow had first come to her when she was a child, that it would stand in the corner of her room and watch her at night, that it would follow her in the hallway, that it would touch her face with cold fingers and whisper her name. Emma felt tears in her eyes as she listened to Claire, her best friend, shaking as she told her that the shadow had never left her, that it had been with her every night, waiting in the dark. Emma told Claire that they would face it together, that they would not run anymore, that they would not let the fear control them. The whispering outside grew louder, the sound of the shadow calling to them, the cold air moving into the shed as the door shook on its hinges. Claire closed her eyes and said that she was tired of being afraid, that she wanted it to stop, that she wanted to be free. Emma held her close and told her that they would make it stop together, that they would fight the darkness. The door of the shed started to open slowly, the cold darkness moving inside as the shape of the shadow appeared in the doorway, its pale face glowing in the dark, its empty eyes locked on them. Emma stood up and pulled Claire to her feet. They faced the shadow together, the fear inside them heavy, but they did not step back. The shadow stepped into the shed, the darkness wrapping around them, the cold making their skin hurt. Emma felt the shadow reach for her, but she grabbed Claire's hand and squeezed it tight. She told the shadow to leave them alone, that they were not afraid anymore, that it could not take them. The shadow stopped moving, its empty eyes looking at them, the darkness around it shifting and moving. Claire shouted at it, telling it to leave, that it was not welcome, that it could not hurt them anymore. The shadow stood still, the darkness around it shaking as if it was angry. The cold grew stronger, and the shed shook around them, but Emma and Claire did not let go of each other. They stood together, facing the shadow, the fear inside them turning into something else, turning into anger, turning into strength. Emma shouted that they were not afraid, that they would not run, that they would not let it control them anymore. The shadow started to fade, the darkness around it pulling back as the first light of dawn came through the cracks in the shed. The cold started to lift and the darkness grew weaker. The shadow took one last look at them before it faded into the air, the cold leaving with it. The shed was quiet. The air was warm again. Emma and Claire stood there breathing hard, holding each other as the sunlight came through the cracks. They knew the shadow was gone. They knew they had faced the darkness and had won. They stepped out of the shed into the morning light, the grass wet under their feet, the world quiet and calm. Emma looked at Claire and saw her smiling for the first time in a long time. They knew the fear would try to come back. They knew the darkness would try to return, but they also knew that they were not the same anymore. They had faced the darkness together, and they had come out stronger. They had found the strength inside them to fight, and they knew they would never be alone in the dark. Again, Emma and Claire walked back into the house, the morning light touching the old walls that once held the darkness. They could still feel the cold in the air, but it was weaker now, like a memory that could no longer hurt them. Claire made tea in the small kitchen, her hand steady for the first time in years. Emma looked around the house and saw it with new eyes. The walls no longer held shadows. The air no longer felt heavy. The fear that once lived here was gone. Claire sat with Emma at the old wooden table, and they drank the warm tea in silence, the warmth moving through them, reminding them that they were alive, reminding them that they had faced the darkness and had not broken. Claire told Emma that she had spent so many nights alone in this house, feeling the shadow in the corners of her room, hearing it call her name in the darkness, feeling its cold hand on her face when she tried to sleep. She said she had thought she would never be free. She had thought the darkness would take her piece by piece until there was nothing left. But fear. Emma listened and held her hand and told her that she was not alone anymore, that she would never be alone again. Claire smiled, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. They cleaned the house together, opening all the windows, letting the sunlight touch every dark corner, letting the fresh air push out the old fear. They washed the blankets and opened the doors to the rooms that had stayed shut for years. They let the light in. They let the warmth in. Emma found an old photo of Claire as a child standing in the yard with her parents. She was smiling, her eyes bright with hope. Emma showed it to Claire, and Claire laughed a small soft laugh that filled the room with warmth. They decided to burn the old blanket that Claire said the shadow used to touch when it came to her room. They took it to the yard and set it on fire, watching the smoke rise into the sky, the ashes carried away by the wind. Claire said it felt like the final piece of the fear leaving her. She felt light. She felt free. That night they had one last sleepover, but this time there was no fear. There were no shadows waiting in the hallway, no cold air creeping under the door, no whispers calling in the dark. They talked and laughed until they fell asleep under the soft glow of the lamp. The darkness was there outside the window, but it could not enter. It could not touch them, because they had faced it, and they had won. They had taken back their nights. They had taken back their hope. When Emma woke up, she looked at Claire sleeping peacefully, the morning light on her face, and she felt something deep inside her shift. She felt strong. She felt free. She knew that the darkness would always exist in the world, that there would always be shadows that tried to take the light, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She had the strength to fight, and she had the power to protect the people she loved. She stood up and opened the window, letting the fresh morning air fill the room. The sky was clear, and the world was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt peace. She turned to Claire and whispered, "Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for letting me help you." And Claire opened her eyes and smiled and whispered back, "Thank you for staying. Thank you for helping me find the light again." They both knew that they would never be the same again. They had faced the darkness and found their strength. They had turned their fear into power. They had learned that sometimes you have to lose the light to learn how to fight. For it, they had learned that facing the darkness was the only way to find who you really are, and now they were free. The end.